Hi friends, welcome to the Bible Project Daily Podcast, episode 264 of our journey together through the entire Bible, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. And we're in season 2, part 195, which is our journey initially through the book of Genesis, and we've reached the middle of chapter 25. Now, if you've just joined us today for the first time, why not consider going right back to the start, playing catch up for a little while as we work through the entire Bible, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, in these roughly 6 to 8 minute individual studies. If you go back to 1, there's initially an overview in season 1 of each and every one of the 66 books of the Bible. But if you'd rather pick up straight away in the text, then around about episode 70 we launched off into the book of Genesis. So I've called the overview of this second half of Genesis chapter 26 the sovereignty of God, and today we'll be looking at a couple of verses from chapter 25, 18 through 20. Now, we were reminded in the last episode that Abraham had a son called Isaac. Remember, prior to this, God had said, I'm going to make you the father of many nations. That's speaking to Abraham. And he said that in chapter 15. He said it again in chapter 17. And in fact, he repeated it again in chapter 18. He repeatedly said to Abraham, I'm going to make you a father of many nations. And he also said that he would do that through his wife Sarah. And so this chapter has been telling us about the family line of his sons. Now, last time we looked at the family line of Ishmael, and today we're looking at the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son that he had through his wife, Sarah. Now, we already know from the book of Genesis that Abraham and Sarah, initially, they couldn't have any children, and the same thing is happening here to Isaac and Rebekah. But from a spiritual point of view, this is a test for Isaac, because he gets married to Rebekah and they have no children. So in a sense, it's the same test of faith that his father faced. Now, there is a sense for all of us that life is a test, and the test is always, when we come to our decision making, are we going to believe God? Are we going to learn from difficult times? Are we going to grow from the times of testing? Or are we going to try and figure things out, do things, plan our own way through, and ignore perhaps what the Lord would want to tell us? This is a condition in life that I believe we're all in all the time. In fact, we're in that state whether we accept it, understand it, or believe it or not. Now, keeping one finger in Genesis chapter 5, I'd like for a moment to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning at verse 8, where Paul says this, and this will hopefully throw some light on the situation of finding a way through difficult times. He's writing and he says, We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we are experiencing in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despised of death itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raised the dead. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us. As you help us by your prayers, then many will give thanks in our behalf for the gracious favour God granted us in the answering to the prayers of the many. So do you hear what Paul is saying here? I want you to understand what has happened to me, he's saying. He calls it his trouble, and he says that he was under great pressure. The King James, I think, puts it better when it says, I was burdened beyond all measure. So whatever this trouble he's talking about was too much. It felt bigger than he could handle. He didn't have the personal resources or the strength to deal with it or handle it, which is why he actually says in verse 8, I despaired of life itself. So for us, even if we feel like things are beyond our reach, even if we feel like it's almost like a life or death situation, we should not trust in ourselves, but trust in the God who can raise the dead, as Paul says. Did you see that? These verses explain why God allows problems and difficulties in our life, so that even if we can't figure them out, even if we don't know what's going on, even if these things are beyond our own means to handle, in many cases it's a test to see whether you'll try and figure it out on your own or whether you're going to trust the Lord. Paul says that very clearly, not just here in 1 Corinthians, but in 2 Corinthians also. And this was the situation where he said he was beyond his own strength, beyond his own resources. Now, I would suggest if you're going to grow spiritually, you have to learn to trust the Lord, and it becomes all the more important when times get harder. I think that thinking about this logically, this teaching shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who's trusted in Christ, because we're trusting in Him to get us to heaven. The issue here is, are you going to trust Him to get you through life? And that's the big question. So if we drop back into Genesis 25, we can see Isaac had a problem in his life. God made him this promise that he was going to be a great nation and that he was going to have a son. And by the way, they'd been trying to have a family for 20 years at this point. Think about that, 20 years trying to get pregnant. I've known couples who've had difficulty for 5 or 10 years and have given up. People usually give up or turn to other means by this time. So who else had a problem like this in the Bible? Can you remember? Well, of course, Abraham, his own father, did, but he failed that test. Instead of trusting the Lord to give him a son through his wife Sarah, he, with her permission, spent one night in a tent with a handmaid, and that produced the Arab nations, who would later, of course, the Jews would come along later through Sarah. And to be frank, those two nations have been at it ever since. And it all happened because Abraham spent one night in a tent with a servant girl. He tried to work it out on his own, and he didn't trust the Lord. Now Isaac here, today, in this scripture, has the same problem. Is he going to follow in the footsteps of his father, I wonder? What's he going to do? Well, we'll find out when we come back together next time. I'd just like to remind you that if you're new to this, there's always a transcript of the text, roughly the text of everything I've said in each and every one of these studies, and that's available in the episode notes of any audio version of this podcast. If you're watching it in video format, there'll be a link through to the audio where you can find the transcript in the notes around the video podcast. But anyway, that's it for today. I hope you find it helpful. I hope you find it interesting. I hope you find it encouraging. And I trust I'll see you right back here again very soon on the Bible Project Daily Podcast. Bye-bye for now.